This is the uses and the limitations of the balance sheet. And before I get to that, I'd like to just review some of the concepts underlying the balance sheet so we don't forget everything you learned in Chapter 2. So we have the economic entity assumption, the two parts of it. The accounting for this economic unit has to be kept separate from that of its owners and from other economic units controlled by others. So we're only going to put on this balance sheet the items that go with this particular entity. The second part, if this firm controls the assets of another company, then we have to file consolidated financial statements. We do not do that in this class, but you have to be aware that if that were the case, you would have to file consolidated financial statements. So economic entity assumption, we are going to identify what should be recorded and measured and reported on the balance sheet for this particular company. Measurement principle. On the balance sheet, you've got historic cost and fair value. Your historic cost will be your property, plant, and equipment, and quite a few other assets. The investments are required to be reported at fair value. So we'll see that as we're going through this chapter. Monetary unit assumption, we're using currency as a measure, and we are not adjusting for inflation. Going concern, we're assuming the company's going to keep going. Otherwise, we'd use liquidation values, which we don't. The going concern assumption justifies the use of accumulated depreciation, of allocating the cost of the asset over the future life, since there is a future. Okay, elements on the balance sheet. Assets, liabilities, and our equities. Okay, so uses of the financial statement of financial position or balance sheet, it really kind of shows what the company has available to generate its future cash flows. So we're looking at assets, liabilities, and equities at a given date. And we can use it to look at liquidity. Can the company meet its current obligations? We can look at solvency. Can it kind of survive in the long run? And financial flexibility. Does it have the resources available to either take advantage of opportunities that might come up or survive a downturn? In other words, what is the relationship between the assets and the liabilities? If the assets are more than the liabilities, then the company has some financial flexibility. If you're in a situation where the liabilities are greater than the assets or close to the amount of assets, then not so much. So, and you think about this in personal terms, if you have a large, say, student loan or mortgage outstanding, that limits your financial flexibility because you have to make the payments on that, you have to pay the interest, you have to pay the principal, and it means that you don't have the financial flexibility to say, oh, we could go off to, for a vacation, or we could go, do something fun. You've got less financial flexibility because you have more debt, and that's the same for companies. So we're going to use the balance sheet. It just really is telling us, what resources does the company have available, for to keep generating cash flows in the future. Limitations. Most of your assets and liabilities are going to be reported at the historic cost rather than at fair value. So if you think about this, it doesn't give you a true value of what the company might be worth. So if you think about assets minus liabilities equals the net worth of the company, okay, assets minus liabilities, that's the book value of the company. Most of the time, that's not going to be anywhere near the market value. How do we get the market value? You take the price per share times the number of shares that have been sold on the market, the number of shares outstanding, and that'll give you what's called the market capitalization. That. Oh, this disappeared. I hope that will come back. Wait a minute. Okay, so that gives you the market capitalization. And so I use the example of Electronic Arts, and that's a video game company. They make Battlefield 2. I don't play these at all, but NBA Live. So if you look at their net equity, their book value, assets minus liabilities, it's about $3 billion. But if you look at their market capitalization, how many shares they've got out times the price per share, it's about 12 billion. So the difference between 3 billion and 12 billion. Okay, so that can be viewed as a limitation of the balance sheet. There's also lots of estimates and judgment calls. You've already learned how to estimate bad debts. You estimate the allowance. We will be estimating future warranty liabilities with property, plant, and equipment. The salvage value is an estimate, and the length of life of the assets is an estimate. Where there's estimates, these are all things that can be manipulated, and so that can be a limitation. There's lots of estimates and judgment calls. Also, the balance sheet doesn't tell you everything about the company. You can have two companies that are exactly the same property, plant, and equipment, but one has a highly trained labor force. One has, a loyal customer base. One has an excellent location. The same property, plant, and equipment down the street maybe has a disgruntled labor force, and the customers could care less, and maybe their location's kind of bad. And so those things are, the first company is going to have a lot more ability to generate cash flows, but that will not show up on the balance sheet. So it leaves out these assets, the highly trained labor force, the loyal customer base, that are just not, they're not going to be reported. And then there's off-balance sheet financing. This used to be more of an issue. It's, I may do a separate video on that, but basically it's putting the liabilities of your company on somebody else's books. Okay, Enron was famous for this. They had about 3,000 sort of related companies that they put a lot of their debt on, and they hid it from their investors, and that did not go well. So off-balance sheet financing, the SEC and Sarbanes-Oxley have tightened up on that quite a bit, but it's still something to be aware of. Okay, so uses, limitations. Next we get to the various classifications of the balance sheet.